All right, guys, welcome back to another Master and Apprentice video and podcast. Today we got the next book review out for you guys. Today we're going to be going over the novel A New Dawn. This takes place, I believe it's before A New Hope. It's during the Empire, obviously, based off of the characters from the Rebel series, Hera, Syndulla, and Kanan Jarrus. Without further ado, we're going to get right into the review of it. I like this book. There's parts of it I love, parts of it I thought were a little bit boring. And in all honesty, without getting into too many spoilers, this book is just something that I feel like would be a filler episode in the series. It had some interesting parts, and it had the aspects of a good novel, but nothing that took grasp of my attention that really made me really enjoy this novel, that really stood out. Sometimes with these novels, if it's not something that's super important, it brings us a lot of new lore or background information on certain characters, and I really didn't feel like this did that either. So in all honesty, this isn't a bad novel, but I don't rate this very high. It's maybe like a 7 out of 10 for me.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. I mean, it's a very good book in the sense where wow, you get a lot of character development for Kanan, but it just develops him into the character we know in the Rebels. So, Kanan and Hera. I mean, we know that Kanan was a Jedi that survived Order 66. We really don't know a crazy ton more about it, and now from this book, we know that oh yeah, his master, he wasn't able to save his master. We could have already assumed just about everything about his past that we found in this book. And it's not that that's not good. We get a lot of stories in Star Wars that are, oh, this Jedi survived Order 66. There's a ton of them out there. There's a ton more to be told. But this one just really didn't bring anything new. The villain we see in this, Count Vidian, that's one of the bigger villains in this. There's a couple, but he doesn't even.
For a novel that's based in the Imperial Eye, right, the height of the Empire, essentially, the antagonist Count Vidian, he's a cool character. They did a good job of making him the antagonist and then a clear antagonist. I enjoyed his character, but it didn't really relate to the story much as a whole of Star Wars, right? It wasn't like I can see how this affects the Empire, right? Whereas at least in Ahsoka, for instance, we're getting the Inquisitor, right? Or we're getting, I forget what the main antagonist officer we get, but it's an Imperial officer, right? Or in Dark Disciple, it's Count Dooku or Ventress. Like, it's very clear the antagonist, and it actually has ties, or it's directly tied to the main overarching story of the Star Wars story. Whereas this one really doesn't feel like it. It just feels like a side quest, right? This feels like a show in the Rebels, and it's like maybe Ezra asks Kanan about some of his history, and the next episode is him remembering back to this, and that's all that it is. Like, it feels like it has really no importance at all, right? There are some cool parts of it. It's not bad. It's really not boring. With that being said, if we go ahead and pull up our tier list that we've been ongoing adding new books to, you can see on S tier we've got Dark Disciple and Bloodline, and then in A tier we got Jedi Lost and Tarkin, and in B we have Ahsoka. In all honesty, I put New Dawn either bottom of B or in C. I thought Ahsoka had more to do with the overarching story of Star Wars, not only because the character, like the main character, the protagonist, Ahsoka, is more important, but the antagonist, the Inquisitor, is more important too, as well as just like background information. Even in this, it wasn't really like super groundbreaking stuff, and that's not necessarily the novel's fault. That's more to do that we've seen their information, their background story in Bad Batch, right, with Kanan Jarrus when his master is killed in Order 66, or in Hera in Clone Wars where we see her father, can't remember his name, something in Syndulla, is the leader on Rathal, right, and their civil war. So we see their background kind of already displayed throughout Star Wars, and this novel really didn't bring anything new to light. It's not a bad book. I really don't want to put that kind of light on it, but comparing this to other Star Wars novels, it's kind of bottom of the totem for me. So I would either put it bottom of B or top of C.
Every time after I read a book, I want to put it in the top of the tier list. Like I think after Ahsoka, I wanted to put an A. This book, I'm not even like crazy hyped for because during the book, every chapter I'd stop on and be like, oh, I'm excited to see what happens next. But now that I read the whole thing, I'm like, okay, Count Vidian put someone into killed someone. Wow, that's really he had some really cool aspects. He was like a cyborg and all this kind of stuff, and that's not something you see a ton of in Star Wars. And he was a cool character, but there just wasn't like at the very end they brought in a higher up Imperial officer. It would have been really nice to see Moff Tarkin or some really high up officer, even Lord Vader on some kind of a comm device being communicated to. But there's just no effect. You ever go to a meeting and say this could have been done in an email? Yeah. It's
that
not
novel.
a bad book at all. It's really a cool story and it's fun, but it's just
It's middle
it
of the
takes
line,
too
the
long.
best.
I want to put it in C.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
It's
We
not
could definitely put it up to B because I don't think there's a lot of novels worse than this, and that's kind of why it goes to C. But there's also a lot more novels I think that are more interesting and are just more involved with the overarching story of Star Wars, which that in itself is a big piece for me, right? Especially when reading a Star Wars novel. Whenever you read any of these kind of novels, right? Like the what is that, Warhammer 40K, or Star Trek, or any of these books that are kind of tied to these other big IPs, you kind of expect the story to be some sort of spin-off, but in the end to have a tie to the story, like to have some resemblance of importance, right? It's not going to be super important because it's a novel, it's not on screen. Obviously it's not going to be the biggest piece, the most important thing going on, but it should have some sort of resemblance, some tie-in to the main story. And this really just didn't feel like it did. There were some cool parts of it, and that's why it's not D. It's not a bad book, but overall, it just didn't seem important, right? So let us know if you guys agree with this or not. Again, not a bad book. Recommend it. After you've read a couple other books, it's definitely not one I would recommend to start off with when reading Star Wars novels. This is one I would recommend if you're bored, right? Not a bad read at all. So with that, we hope you guys did enjoy this. Don't forget to hit that subscribe and like. If you guys are listening on the podcast, don't forget to hit that download and follow. We did end up putting this in the C tier if you guys are on podcast. So, yep. With that, we hope you guys did enjoy this, and we'll see you later.
Peace.